2, Unit 5, Worksheet 5, Mid-Unit Review. First thing we want to do on these is always decide what kind of figure this is. The only thing we know is opposite sides are parallel, so we know this thing is a parallelogram. Okay, in a parallelogram we know that opposite angles are congruent and consecutive angles are supplementary. So this is 5x plus 70 equals 180, which means 5x equals 110, which means x equals 22. In y, for y, we know opposite angles are congruent. So we know that 4y equals 70. Divide both sides by 4 and we get y equals 17.5. Okay, on to number 2. All right, number 2, we've got 4 congruent sides, which means it's at least a rhombus, but we've got an angle that is right, so we know this is a square. All right, in a rhombus and square, we know the diagonals are perpendicular, so we know that x is 90 degrees. We know in a rhombus the diagonals bisect the angles, and since we know all 4 angles are 90 degrees, we know y must be 45 degrees. 90 divided by 2 is 45. All right, on to number 3. All right, well, we've got opposite sides are congruent, which means it's a parallelogram. We've got one right angle, consecutive angles are supplementary, so we know all 4 angles are right. So we know this is a rectangle. All right, so x, let's see. Well, to find x, we know that in a rectangle, the diagonals are congruent, and in a parallelogram, the diagonals are bisected. And since a rectangle is a parallelogram, we know both are true, so we've got all 4 of these half diagonals are congruent, which means we have 4 isosceles triangles. So if that's 37, we know base angles are congruent of an isosceles triangle. So 37 plus 37 is 74. 180 minus 74 is 106. So we know x is 106. All right, we also know that we'll say triangle 1 and triangle 2 are congruent. So if this is 37, y is 37. And finally, solving for z, we know opposite sides are congruent. So 8z minus 7 equals 3z plus 3. Subtract 3z from this side, subtract 3z from this side, we have 5z. Add 7 to this side, it goes away, add 7 to this side, we get 10. Divide both sides by 5, we get z equals 2. Moving on to number 4. All right, so we know that all 4 sides are congruent, and so it's a rhombus. Diagonals bisect the angles of a rhombus, so we know this is 52. So we know it's not a square, we know it's just a rhombus. But we do know in a rhombus diagonals are perpendicular, so we know x is 90 again. Well, if this is 52 and this is 90, well then that adds up to 142. And 180 minus 142 is 38. So y is 38. All right, n. So we know a rhombus is a parallelogram, and the diagonals of a parallelogram bisect each other. So we know that 8n minus 11 equals 5n plus 1, which means 3n equals 12, which means n equals 4. And I forgot to name this. I said it. It's a rhombus. Okay, moving on to number 5. Opposite sides are congruent, so we know it's at least a parallelogram, but we don't know anything else, so we're going to stick with parallelogram. All right, so in a parallelogram, we, let's see, start with x. Well, we know that this is a parallelogram, so this diagonal could be a transversal, and we know alternate interior angles are congruent, so we could say 7x minus 19 equals 5x plus 3. Subtract 5x from both sides, you get 2x on this side. Add 19 to both sides, you end up with 22. Divide both sides by 2, and we get x equals 11. Okay, now solving for y. Let's see, where's y? Right here? Well, we got to take 11 and plug it in. 5 times 11 is 55 plus 3 is 58. So this angle's 58 and this angle's 24. So that means together they must add up to 82, which means y has got to be 180 minus 82, which is 98. All right, now solving for n. Well, this one we wouldn't be able to do, but they tell us up here the perimeter of the quadrilateral is 90. So what that means, we've got two of these guys, so 2 times 5n plus 7, plus 2 of these guys, 2 times 3n plus 2. Add that all up and it should equal 90. So that's 10n plus 14 plus 6n plus 4 equals 90. Add these two, we get 16n. Add these two, we get 18. So 16n plus 18 equals 90. Subtract 18 from both sides, we get 16n equals, what do we get, 72?
Yep.
Divide both sides by 16 and we get n equals 4.5. All right, any questions on 1 through 5? Okay.